This is the smell of the leftover tuna fish sandwich you left in your lunchbox over the weekend in a wimpy trash bag.
Wimpy, wimpy, wimpy!
Blech! And this is the smell of that same sandwich in a hefty, ultra-strong trash bag.
Hefty, hefty, hefty!
Ah, smell the difference? Hefty Ultra Strong has Arm & Hammer with continuous odor control, so no matter what's inside your trash, you can stay one step ahead of stinky. And for bigger jobs, try the superior strength of Hefty Large Black Bags.
Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to sort of do a sequel to a episode we did a long time ago, Chris, when we did an episode on Moores Creek. And I think our listeners, those who don't remember the episode or need to go back and hear the episode for the first time, it's a long way back in our catalog, Chris. I think that was done very early on. But we did an episode on Moores Creek Battle, the battle at Moores Creek Bridge, here in southeast North Carolina in what is today Pender, North Carolina. And this sort of piggybacks on that because that particular battle happened on February 27, 1776. What we're going to talk about today, the so-called Halifax Resolves, and I guess the Declaration of Independence, April 4, 1776 in Halifax, North Carolina. So, Chris, there's a lot of history that happened right here in North Carolina in the lead up to the American Declaration of Independence.
Yes, and it's really fascinating to kind of take the different pieces of history, and as you start putting them together, you see this beautiful tapestry that kind of comes together of how certain events were needed to kind of break the common direction. Like, you know, everything was just kind of, so we really don't like Great Britain, and we're really pretty upset. But then when blood is starting to be shed, and when homes are being destroyed, and then when it starts to happen in your own backyard, you start to finally look for that thing that basically shows you that there's no other way. And I mean, Ray, we can kind of go back and look at all parts of history, and there's a moment. And in that moment, it's when things turn, when things change. And that moment was February 1776 with the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, when the colonists finally recognized that, to, I guess, paraphrase the great words of the poet Taylor Swift, we're never, ever, ever getting back together again. And there was the separation.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, when I think about the American Revolution, I never think of Taylor Swift. I guess that's a fault in my logic, but no, it's a good I guess parallel. You know, we're never getting together again, and I guess the Declaration of Independence is sort of, I heard people say, the ultimate breakup letter.
Well, exactly, it is it is a breakup letter because after Moores Creek, a couple of things happen. The colonists begin to realize that, first of all, reconciling with Great Britain is just not going to happen. It's not going to take place. And then the second thing is, it's okay if it doesn't take place, because we can actually do this. We can be successful. We can possibly not just run our own colonies or even our own country, but we can stand up to the mighty Redcoats.
Yeah, you know, the United States, but the colonies have been at war with Great Britain now a little over about a year, I guess you could say, because it was in 1775, the spring, I believe April 1775, when you had the first shot, so-called the shot heard around the world at Lexington, Massachusetts, and then Concord, Massachusetts, and of course you have all the battles that take place between then in 1775 and now, or in 1776, with February 27, 1776, the battle at Moores Creek Bridge. So we come now to Halifax. It's April of 1776, and there's this Fourth Provincial Congress that meets there in Halifax. And of course, they're looking, Chris, at all this stuff that has gone on, whether you're talking about the taxes, the aggression at Moores Creek, or all this other stuff, and they're saying, you know what, maybe it is time to write that breakup letter. Maybe it's time to put an official end to the relationship. So what they do there in Halifax in April of 1776 is they take action. They're the first colony, North Carolina is the first colony to sort of look at their delegates in Philadelphia at the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, and say, you have our permission to vote for, to support independence.
Yeah, and many people might be thinking, I know of Raleigh and Fayetteville and Wilmington, but Halifax, what's there about Halifax? Well, in today's society, if you ever have the chance to visit Halifax, it's a very quaint town. It's one of those small just places you want to go and visit. But back then, it was the county seat.
Yeah.
It was a river port. It was the place to be. I mean, so having a provincial Congress meet in Halifax is a big deal, and it's very important. And you're right. They're looking at all of these things, and not only did they look at them, but they're going to be the ones who basically are given a task. And the task is, listen, we need you to write it up, talking about all of the bad things that King George has done. We need you to give a list of grievances, give a list of issues and problems. And Ray, we talk about the Declaration of Independence, how, it didn't happen overnight, right? I mean, It took a lot of time, and there was a lot of discussions and a lot of back and forth, but the Congress, the provincial Congress, takes this Halifax Resolves, and in about 8 days have this agreement that is really impressive and gets the point across in a pretty short statement, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Declaration of Independence, and I don't know how many words it is off the top of my head or anything like that, and you look at the Halifax Resolves, it's a very brief document, but it covers a lot of the same ground as the Declaration of Independence, and you're talking about how Halifax was such a quaint little town. But in 1775, this is before the Halifax Resolves. In 1775, Halifax is a pretty big weapons depot for the militia here in North Carolina. And they're also raising up Minutemen who would, militia members who would be ready to fight to protect their communities if necessary. So it's a very important town, so important actually in 1781, British Colonel Bannister Tarleton is actually going to attack the town. So it's an important enough town in many ways to where it does get a little bit of attention. But like you say now, one wouldn't necessarily think that all that's actually happened there happened. And it's a place that made national and even worldwide news, maybe not at the time, but when we look back and think about the Halifax Resolves and the importance of the Halifax Resolves being the first sort of declaration of independence in the United Colonies.
And I think it's important that you mention that, because the Halifax Resolves are important not just because they are that first official action that calls for independence, but it's not a unilateral recommendation. This is not just North Carolina saying North Carolina should declare their own independence and be free and shouldn't have it. This was a declaration in which, as you mentioned, they gave to the three guys up there in Philadelphia and said, hey, this is for everybody. Yeah. As you just mentioned, the United Colonies. And so this is a recommendation that is directed to every colony. It's directed to every delegate that is assembled. And it is so powerful of a document, or maybe it was the three guys who were so persuasive in selling this document to the others, but it's not long after the Halifax Resolves that Virginia, and most importantly Richard Henry Lee, makes a recommendation that independence be established by all the colonies.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we go through the Halifax Resolves here, it starts off by saying the Select Committee taking into consideration the usurpations and violences attempted and committed by the King and Parliament of Britain against America, and the further measures to be taken for frustrating the same and for the better defense of this Providence report as follows, to wit. And, it's interesting here that they're putting Parliament and the King in the same sentence, because I think early on, maybe not here, I suppose here in North Carolina too, Chris, but early on, I guess places in Massachusetts, they were in 1775, they were sending 1774, they were sending the king, an olive branch petition, hoping he would step in for them. And here, by 1776, the realization has dawned on these people that no, he's not.
Yeah, and the Declaration of Independence, not to get off on that document, but the Declaration of Independence is written to many people, and not just to King George.
Right.
The Declaration of Independence was really written to people in England, saying, "Hey, we're letting you know we don't want to do this. We don't really want to have a bad relationship with you because you're family, right? I mean, there's a lot of relationships, but the king has done wrong." And the Declaration of Independence says the king, the king, the king, the king, the king, the king. But when you start looking at the Halifax Resolves, it's really what king and parliament does. So there's more of this is England and not just a king. You could have stopped this, England. Parliament could have controlled your king, but instead you've allowed all of these things to happen, and therefore there's no way that we can resolve this. So we're going to resolve that we're breaking free from you.
Yeah, and it goes on in the Halifax Resolves. It says, "It appears to your committee," and this is, of course, that committee that was put together there in Halifax, "that pursuant to the plan concerted by the British Ministry for subjugating America," the idea that the British are denying Americans their rights, "the King and Parliament of Great Britain have usurped a power over the persons and properties of the people, unlimited and uncontrolled, and disregarded their humble petitions for peace, liberty, and safety, have made diverse legislative acts." Of course, that's referring to the olive branch petitions with, them trying to resolve this peacefully. Then, of course, the legislative acts referring to the declaratory acts, the townshend acts, and these other acts that the British had put into place. And it goes on, it says, and denouncing war, famine, and every species of calamity daily employed in the destroying the people and committing the most horrid devastations on the country. So, this is, it's not cutting any corners here. This is being very blunt about why they are going to, I guess you could say, declare not just North Carolina's independence, but they're pushing for the independence of all the colonies.
Yeah, basically the first original Independence Day, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And, I think it's also important at the end that, first of all, I mean, Ray, I don't know about you, but reading the Declaration of Independence in the language that it was written is so much easier than reading the Halifax Resolves. I mean, they must have had the Old English thesaurus nearby when they decided to read. I mean, just listening to you read the first paragraph there, how many times is the word usurpation and to wit and hitherto, hitherto
the
is
King's English.
The aforesaid wrongs. And I also find it interesting how the way that they capitalize some words and then they don't capitalize some words, talking about by those means alone which you have been hitherto tried. So I think for our listeners, it's if you could just read that again in your British accent, I think it would really, really be good if you could do it.
I don't have a British accent.
Well, there you go. I resolve that you do that next time, right?
I need to learn British.
But one of the other things in this, we mentioned who the Declaration was being written to, but who was the Halifax Resolves being written to also? It was a document for the world.
Yeah.
Because as they concluded, every document always has this, therefore be it resolved. So we've told you why we're doing this, right? So we're explaining why we're giving up, this partnership and this alliance, why we're leaving and declaring independence. But at the end, they said that we are empowered to agree with the other delegates of the other colonies. So this is not just North Carolina, it's going to be all of us, and we're going to declare independency. But notice that phrase that we're going to form foreign alliances.
Yeah.
Why is this important? Because while Great Britain is dealing with us and this tit for tat that is going on, England is also trying to gain dominance in the world. I mean, they are still competing against France and against Spain. And so when you see the Halifax Resolves reaching out to those individuals, its intention is to scare England. And ultimately, of course, the American Revolution we win that because of those foreign alliances, especially I just like saying his name, Marquis de Lafayette.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that it's because of France that allows us to be successful. So we see in the very first document of independence that the colonies are saying we can't do this alone.
No.
We're going to need help.
And absolutely they're going to need help. And I think it is interesting that they don't mention here France, but they say forming foreign alliances. The British had to be concerned, does this mean France?
Yeah.
Because France was sort of their old adversary. And, they're going to be their adversary well into the Washington administration, the Adams administration, on into the Jefferson administration as well. That, England and France will be going at it. So that France is going to enter this war on the side of the colonies.
Especially after the French and Indian War, where that's the whole reason we got into this mess,
because were fighting the very people they're now taking the side of.
And so England basically said, "Hey, we supported the colonists by fighting against the French. We've taken care of you guys. We just need you to help pay for it." And that's what started this whole taxation without representation. Next thing you know, you put in this document. Now they weren't bold enough, I guess, to say France because they didn't know how France would respond. But just by saying foreign alliances, read between the lines. This is France.
And France, I think at one point, and it was 1776 that had been here, really reluctant to sort of throw their hat in too much.
No, play both sides.
Play both sides until they can see that the colonists are actually able to win, which of course at Trenton and Washington has a victory there, Saratoga, Gates has a victory there, and once the French see that the colonies can actually stand up on their own, then the French are more willing to get fully involved. And ultimately, like you said, they're going to play a big role in America's victory in independence.
Yeah, and I think the final thing for me that was fascinating about the Halifax Resolves is I think there were 83 members of the 4th Provincial Congress. And Ray, something that we haven't heard a lot of in today's society, but out of 83 members of that Congress, how many voted in favor of the Halifax Resolves?
All of them. All 83. It was unanimous.
It's amazing. And one thing to keep in mind is this was like a death sentence, just as the Declaration of Independence was. When you signed your name to it, you were letting the whole world know that you no longer wanted to be in a relationship with the king, that you were giving up everything that he had given you to establish a colony and to begin, and you were basically looking at him and saying, we no longer want anything to do with you, see you later.
Yeah.
And that, of course, was going to make the king mad, but it would also make people in England mad, and you were basically allowing people to say, you're the reason, because not everybody in the colonies was on board with this.
No, there were loyalist people who were loyal to the king and to Parliament. And interestingly, there were people in Parliament that sort of sympathized with the Americans, called them Whigs. So, it wasn't always the clear black and white lines that sometimes we draw, but, you talk about how this was treason for these people. It was Benjamin Franklin once said that most assuredly we shall all hang together or we will all hang separately, something to that effect.
Yeah.
This idea that we're going to sign our names to this Declaration of Independence, we're going to declare independence, and we are going to, if we are not successful in this, we're going to hang.
Which, leads to, for all of our listeners who reside in the state of North Carolina, when you go to renew your driver's license and your plates for your cars, you have the choice. First in flight, first in freedom. And so many people might not be aware of what does it mean. I think it's first in freedom, isn't it? And people might not be aware of why does it say first in freedom. But if they'll look closely on there, what do they see?
In Halifax.
The Halifax Resolves and the date that the Halifax Resolves are. And in addition, if they look up at the flag of North Carolina, they'll also see the date of the Halifax Resolves.
Indeed. And I will tell you, you mentioned First in Flight. We also did an episode early on the Wright brothers. So if you have not listened to our episode on Morse Creek, you haven't listened to our episode on the Wright brothers, those episodes are back in our back catalog somewhere, Chris, for our listeners to listen to.
So we've covered both license plates. The only one we haven't done is that one that says, I heart George Washington. I think that's yours, so we need to do that
that's mine. I did have to pay some extra money for that one.
That's right. So, hey, I enjoyed the Halifax Resolves. And, by the way, if anybody ever decides to go down to Halifax on April 12th every year, they recreate the Halifax Resolves.
Yeah. The people, I guess, voting and signing the Declaration, the Halifax Resolve, which, of course, was the first time one of the colonies had officially pronounced independence from Great Britain. Chris, I've really enjoyed this episode. For our listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter. You can contact us by email at historyyoushouldknow@gmail.com. That's historythelletteryoushouldknow@gmail.com. Please share this podcast with your friends and your family. We're available here on Sounder FM. We're available on Stitcher. We're also available on other podcast outlets such as Google and
Spotify. Everywhere.
I always want to forget Spotify. Yeah. So I hope you'll share this podcast, come back, listen to past podcast episodes, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
Talk to you later.